Greetings all, FerrariMan601 here. Well, with the release of the VRC 2005 Formula 1 cars, the Renault R25 and the McLaren MP420, it occurred to me the idea of validation in sim racing, and yes, at great peril of stirring up a tremendous hornet's nest among the realism crowd, can we actually validate the accuracy, in tremendous air quotes there, of a mod in sim racing? Now, what are we going to define as accuracy? Well, this is going to be an inherently subjective pursuit, is it not? Well, we can look at this somewhat scientifically, and of course, there's no way that we could possibly account for every single variable that can affect the performance of a car because, well, we simply cannot test this in the real world, and nor are we able to go back in time, in this case to 2005, to the actual day that we are trying to emulate here and see how things stack up. However, we can come mighty close, and we do have access to some data that can help us better understand what's going on here. So here are the experimental parameters. First off, the things that we cannot know. Of course, 2005 was a long time ago, and the amount of data that we have from the 2005 season, although it is plentiful and rather easily accessible, it's not complete by any means, and especially when we're trying to look into the very specific nature of car performance on a given circuit on a given day, there are certain things that we must account for, namely weather conditions. Now, thankfully, in the wonderful, glorious age of the internet in which we're in, we can actually access archival weather conditions for basically any point on Earth going back decades at this point. So, I was able to access archival weather reports for the three circuits which we will be visiting, and they are Catalunya, Imola, and Monza. So, as you'll see on screen, we actually have, via Weather Underground, reports of the overall weather conditions. I am mainly interested in ambient temperature here, so you can see a plot out in Fahrenheit on this graph of the ambient temperature going on at these three locations on qualifying day, leading up to those appropriate respective Grands Prix. So for Catalunya, this was the 7th of May, 2005. For Imola, this was the 23rd of April 2005, and for Monza, this was the 4th of September 2005. And as you can see here, we have a nice little rise over run plot of what the ambient temperature did throughout the day. What I don't have access to are the specific wind conditions at the circuit at the time of these qualifying laps. Therefore, I am going to default to calm winds here in Assetto Corsa. I can't know that variable, so we're going to assume that it didn't play that much of a role. Of course, that could be completely wrong. However, I can't validate that one way or another. The other thing that we're going to be ignoring here is the track condition. Now, that's a huge variable to be ignoring. However, I cannot know, and really no one can know, specifically what the track conditions were for these qualifying sessions unless you happen to be one of the drivers who participated therein. Seeing that no one has come forward from the 2005 Formula 1 field to tell me what the track conditions were at these three circuits on these 3 days, we're going to load everything in here 100% rubbered in for optimal grip. Of course, this cannot be accurate, but it's what we're doing here, trying to eliminate variables. So that leaves us with ambient temperature, which we can plot via these graphs, and therefore, with a little bit of math, we can convert Fahrenheit to centigrade, and we can load in the appropriate temperatures for the appropriate time of day and for the appropriate calendar date of the year that each one of these sessions took place on. Therefore, in the sim for Imola, will be running on April 23rd, 2005. For Catalunya, will be running on May 7th, 2005. And for Monza, will be running on September 4th, 2005. Now, the first circuit here that we can take a look at is Catalunya. Luckily for us in Assetto Corsa, we do have access to exactly the same configuration of Catalunya as was used for the 2005 Spanish Grand Prix. Now, this is not accessible via the menu options in Assetto Corsa. What we have to do is we have to make it ourselves. So, on one of the outlaps that I did prior to setting my lap here, I actually had to go down to turn 9, La Caixa, and knock down the barriers there, the foam barriers that block off the corner on the Moto version of the circuit. So we are running with the tighter La Caixa corner. However, that is what they were running in 2004 and 2005, '04 being the first year for that change to the circuit. We are running the Europcar and New Holland complex as they were without the chicane that was installed in '07. Therefore, we do have a one-to-one replica of Catalunya available. The timing does still work when you do this little technically cut of the circuit, so the data that we get from the timing in the game is going to be accurate, and that is how we're going to be timing this lap here, so no problems with any of that. Now, some more information. For 2005, unlike what we see in Formula One nowadays, qualifying was a bit different. For the beginning of the 2005 season, the drivers would actually participate in 2 qualifying sessions, spread over 2 days. And in these sessions, they would each set 1 flying lap. In the beginning part of the season, the lap times were added together to form an aggregate qualifying time, and that was the time that set the starting order for the race. Now, we're not going to be doing that here, because that would complicate the data set a little bit more than I'm willing to contend with right now. So, what we're actually going to be doing is benchmarking our times to what was set in the first qualifying session, which I'll refer to as Q1. And Q1 for the 2005 Spanish Grand Prix occurred on the 7th of May. So that is the time that we're going to be looking at, Q1 for the Spanish Grand Prix. After about midway through the season, the 2-day qualifying was basically abandoned in favor of a 1-day qualifying, similar to what we have today. However, a single hot lap was still what the drivers had to play with. So 1 flying lap is all they had, so 1 flying lap is all I have. Now this raises another couple of questions. Tires. 2005, yes, we had the rule where the tires couldn't be changed not only after qualifying, but during the race as well. However, we had a tire war going on, so there were Bridgestone and Michelin supplying tires to all the teams. Both of the cars here are running on Michelin tires. But it was not at all uncommon, in fact it was expected in these days, for teams to run bespoke tires for every race. So, we don't have access to that data, and I certainly wouldn't know enough to be able to say one way or another whether or not VRC's recreation of these tires is at all accurate. I just can't know that. Feels okay to me, but my opinion is only worth my opinion. You may feel differently, and neither one of us can prove either one's contention anyway. So that's another variable that we can't really account for. Unfortunately, we just have to deal with what we have in front of us. Because I do know that the teams would be thinking rather conservatively here, because the tires do have to last for the race distance plus qualifying, I'm not going to be running the softest available tires. What we've done for all of these runs here is to fit the soft compound. We have the super soft, soft, medium, and hard available with these cars. We're fitting the second softest, the soft compound for all of these runs, and that will remain constant throughout the entire experiment. The other variable in terms of car setup that we can't know is fuel load. Of course, fuel load will greatly impact the 1-lap pace as well as the aggregate pace. We simply don't know what the teams were running. For these Q1 times, we're going to assume that they were running just enough fuel to do an out lap, a qualifying lap, and an in lap. So roughly 3 laps worth of fuel on board. I'm not going to be showing you the in lap after these runs. However, rest assured that I am not running out of fuel as I'm crossing the line here. There is enough fuel in the car to get it back to the pit lane at the end of the qualifying lap. I'm simply omitting that here for the sake of brevity. But we don't know what the actual fuel loads were. We can assume, given that the drivers would turn the engine down immediately after crossing the line, that they must have had not quite enough fuel to do 3 full laps at race pace. So that's a guess. I've pegged everything on all of these runs to 12 liters in the tank from leaving the pit lane. That also will remain constant throughout all of these runs. Therefore, to Catalunya with us. On your screen now, these are the qualifying results for the 2005 Spanish Grand Prix. Again, we are concerned with that Q1 time, the fastest of which there you could see was actually set by Jarno Trulli in the Toyota 114.795. Now, we don't have a Toyota available for us, so we're not going to be able to test that, but we are concerned with the 2 McLarens, that's Kimi Räikkönen and Juan Pablo Montoya, as well as the 2 Renaults, Fernando Alonso and Giancarlo Fisichella. So, you can see how they stack up. Generally, all we're going to do here is see what sort of lap time each one of these cars does, and then, because this is exactly the same circuit, the same length, the same configuration, we can actually do a one-to-one comparison of these two. Stand by. Right, so our run in the R25 yielded a 115.253. Again, this is set at 19.4 Celsius, which is the conversion from the Fahrenheit for the ambient temperature there for our weather station closest to the circuit on the 7th of May 2005. The time that we did actually would have been good for P6 in Q1, just ahead of Michael Schumacher. Giancarlo Fisichella in the Renault R25, he set a lap time of 115.601, which was good for P8 in Q1. So we are marginally faster than Fisichella, but of course we are slower than Fernando Alonso. Now, discrepancies in times like these, well, ultimately some of those variables, such as the track state, the tires, and of course the lack of talent from yours truly. I'm not a professional racing driver, I just play one on the internet. Of course, somebody who's better than me probably could go faster. But given that we are setting a time that would have been competitive on the day, out-qualifying our real-world counterpart, Fisichella, I think we could start to say that perhaps we have got ourselves some interesting trends maybe starting to get set up. Of course, we have to see what the McLaren does. Stand by for that. So our run in the McLaren yielded a 1:15.087. This time would have been good for 6th place on the Q1 grid, once again ahead of Michael Schumacher, and once again pretty much exactly as we did in the Renault. P6 in the Renault and P6 in the McLaren. Juan Pablo Montoya, the nearest McLaren to us down the field, he was not having a good day. He did a 1:15.902, which was good for P12, so we're significantly faster than Montoya. Of course, we are slower than Raikkonen. Again, the same potential variables apply: track state, the specifics of the tires, the fuel load, and of course, I am not Kimi Raikkonen or Juan Pablo Montoya, and of course, I'm not doing this for real either. But what we see here, we've got both cars doing competitive times relative to what actually happened in the real world. Again, to put these 6th on the grid, relatively speaking, I would say that's a pretty fair effort. And again, I am not the most talented person in the universe. Therefore, somebody who's better than me most likely is going to do a better time. So far, we have got 2 valid results, I would say. The Renault and the McLaren both setting competitive times relative to Q1 in the 2005 Spanish Grand Prix. Now on to Imola, and on to a little bit of a difference. On your screen now, the qualifying results for the 2005 San Marino Grand Prix at the Imola circuit. This presents a problem for us. The version of Imola that we have in Assetto Corsa is not the same track configuration that existed in 2005. After the 2006 San Marino Grand Prix, there were big renovations done to the Imola circuit, which did alter the configuration as well as the overall length of the circuit. The circuit as it existed in 2005 was 4.933 kilometers long, and it featured a couple of different corners. Most prevalently, it featured the Traguardo corner, which was the final chicane leading back on to the start-finish straight. The 2007 renovation of the circuit deleted that corner as far as cars are concerned. The corner is still used for motorcycles, but it's not really usable in Assetto Corsa. The tarmac still exists, but the actual path that the track follows out of the second Rivazza down to where Traguardo would have been has been altered. Everything is now basically a straight shot from Rivazza down to the start-finish line, so we cannot emulate this even by using a little bit of trickery. Therefore, the circuit length that we have now, and the one that we'll be using in Assetto Corsa, is slightly shorter. 4.909 kilometers is the total length of that. Therefore, we have to interpret our results a little bit differently. We cannot simply compare lap times 1-to-1 per the stopwatch because we're traveling different distances. So we have to come up with a different methodology. What we will do instead is we'll look at the qualifying times that you see on the screen here, and rather than focus on the stopwatch, we're going to do a little bit of V equals D over T and figure out what the average speeds are. P1, Kimi Raikkonen in Q1 with his lap time of 119.886, that comes out to an average speed of 222.301 kilometers per hour over that 4.933 kilometer circuit length. P2, coincidentally enough, Fernando Alonso in the R25, he did a 119.889. So only 0.003 of a second difference between those two guys on the day. However, his average speed is significantly slower, 222.293 kilometers per hour for Fernando Alonso. So the average speed is going to be the benchmark that we use. Now, of course, this is still not foolproof because the circuit has changed. We're not doing exactly the same things with the car at every given point of the lap. Namely, we're not slowing down again after the second Rivazza corner. So average speed, it's still a little bit of an up-in-the-air variable. However, it's as close as we can get, so that's how we're going to be comparing this. So a run in the R25 on the 4.909 Assetto Corsa length version of Imola, 16.1 centigrade ambient temperature on April 23rd, 2005. Our average speed for this run was 226.702 kilometers per hour. Now, this is 3 kilometers per hour faster than Kimi Räikkönen's real-world pole lap, 222.301 there, and it's also faster than Fernando Alonso's P2 pole lap at 222.293 kilometers per hour. So we are theoretically P1 relative to 2005. Now, this perhaps is a bit of an outlier in terms of the data because we're simply not able to do a one-to-one comparison of not only the circuit length, but the actual corners and the moment-by-moment attitude of the car. Yes, we mentioned that the Traguardo corner was deleted in the 2007 renovation. However, Variante Alta, that is the chicane at the top of the hill leading down to the Rivazza complex at the end of the lap. It is significantly slower nowadays than it was in 2005. However, apparently, because we do not have to slow down again out of the Rivazza corners, it would appear that we're able to regain that average speed at the end of the lap and thereby going faster than the 2005 pole position time in the R25. So, interesting result there. Does it mean anything? Let's take a look at the McLaren. Our run in the MP420 yielded a lap time of 117.408, so that is significantly faster by about half a second than what we did time-wise in the R25, comparing 1-to-1 there in terms of the sim. However, the average speed in the MP420 turns out to be 228.301 kilometers per hour. This also is faster than pole position of 222.301 kilometers per hour. So both the MP420 and the R25, as given to us by VRC, in terms of average speed, are faster than pole position for the 2005 San Marino Grand Prix. Given the results that we got at Catalunya, it would appear that this is a bit of a dodgy result. Because, once again, the circuit is different. The corners are different. The configuration is different. We're traveling a shorter distance now. Not by much, but the way in which we're traveling that distance, we're just going flat out, full throttle in a straight line right at the end of the lap. And that is allowing us, of course, to apply full acceleration, get up basically to Vmax by the end of the start-finish straight, breaking into Tamburello, which of course those guys would have done as well, but they had a shorter run-up from the final corner to the line, and therefore they would have been traveling at a lower speed when they crossed the timing line versus what we're doing here. So I'm not entirely sure if we could accept this as valid data, but again, it's as close as we can get given the resources that are available to us. So the MP420 and the R25 at Imola, at least, are quantifiably faster than pole position for the 2005 San Marino Grand Prix. Finally, on to Monza. Quite unlike the situation we had at Imola, Monza once again represents a 1-to-1 correspondence in circuit length and configuration relative to how it was in 2005. The weather for that day, the ambient temperature was quite warm, 27.7 centigrade on September 4th, 2005 for that qualifying session, so we can do a 1-to-1 lap time comparison once again. We don't have to worry about average speed. The stopwatch is going to be our measure. It's going to be accurate because the circuit length is exactly the same as is the configuration. For the Renault run, So our run in the R25 yielded a lap time of 122.099. Theoretically, this would have been good for P10 in the qualifying session. By this point in the season, Q1 and Q2 had been binned. It was just one qualifying session, one flying lap per driver in that one session on one day. So 122.099, theoretically P10. However, more interesting is we are only 31 thousandths of a second off of P9, which was held coincidentally by Giancarlo Fisichella driving the Renault R25. So we are within 30 thousandths of a second of the real world time here set by the real R25 on September 4th, 2005 at Monza with the VRC 1.0 mod. That is pretty close. I would say that's pretty representative. Of course, we are significantly slower than Fernando Alonso. However, we had that discrepancy at Catalunya as well, another one-to-one comparison. So, perhaps we're now getting into the realm of differences, once again, in track state, tires, and driving talent. So, to be that close to the real-world counterpart, I would say that is some good validation here in terms of what VRC have done with the R25. How does the McLaren fare? Let's find out. The run in the MP420 yielded a lap time of 121.728, theoretically good enough for P8 ahead of Rubens Barrichello on the grid. We are significantly slower than Kimi Räikkönen, who set pole position in this session. He didn't start in pole position, but he was fastest in qualifying, and we are down as well on P2, Juan Pablo Montoya, by 0.674. So almost 7/10 off of the next highest McLaren, P2 there, coincidentally, Juan Pablo Montoya. So we are faster than the R25. Just as we found at Catalunya, the MP420 being faster than the R25 in both places now. However, we are significantly slower than the real-world counterpart. Again, we go back into those variables that we simply cannot know. Tires, track state, the wind, and of course driving talent. I will say, just anecdotally, that I had a lot of trouble setting both of these times. Again, perhaps I'm a little bit still unfamiliar with the latest version of both of these cars. Perhaps I could play with the setup a little bit more and get those times down, and perhaps somebody who's better than me is going to be able to go faster and maybe challenge that pole position time of Kimi Räikkönen. However, given the results that we saw at Catalunya, being faster than one car and then slower than another as far as the teams are concerned, splitting the teammates, this is reasonable to me. Certainly it is. I definitely know that I personally could achieve a faster time in this car, on this track, on this setup even. However, I did not want the practice effect to set in too much, seeing that we're making this on the first day that this mod has been publicly available in version 1.0 rather, so I didn't want the practice effect to be fuzzying that data a little bit. So this is what we have. I know I could be better in the MP420, but this is where we are at the moment. In conclusion, is there really a conclusion that we can come to here? Going back to our initial question of accuracy and how can we define it and what does it even mean as far as sim racing is concerned? Obviously, the benchmark that we're using here is lap time relative to the real world. And on circuits that do exist in a one-to-one correspondence in sims as well as reality, perhaps we can look at that as a data point. Of course, we can't emulate everything. I've done as good a job as I can in emulating ambient temperature, but track state and the specific tire compounds and the behavior of that, I simply cannot know that information. The other variables that we do have some control over, we mentioned ambient temperature, but just how do you drive the car? This is what I can do today. Maybe tomorrow I would have a different result in either car on any of these tracks. However, it's what we come to. In conclusion, a couple of things that I was not really looking for. I'm not as good at Monza as I thought I was. That's pretty evident here. And number two, perhaps average speed is not the best metric to go off of. I initially had intended to go to more places. I intended to go to Silverstone as well, where of course we'd also have to use average speed as our benchmark. Just some anecdotal data that I did gather from runs at Silverstone, I did figure out that we were actually running a little bit faster than the average speed, once again, relative to the 2005 British Grand Prix. Of course, Silverstone nowadays is much longer than it was in 2005, yet the average speed was still higher on the laps that I was able to do relative to the times that McLaren at least were able to put in. I did not do any runs in the R25, so maybe that still warrants some investigation to see if the average speed data that we got from Imola could be applicable in other situations. However, for what we have here, I can only say that VRC have built a car that is very accurate at Catalunya, and the R25 is very accurate at Monza, again, being 31 thousandths from the time that Fisichella set on the day. That's wild. I did not expect to get a result that close to the real-world time in any of these trials. As far as the MP420 is concerned, average speed at Imola, it's faster. No question about it. Is that really down to the car? Is it down to the driver? Or is it down to the fact that the circuit now no longer has one more corner toward the end of the lap and therefore you're going faster? Most likely the latter of all of those permutations. However, very good. Very good effort, I've got to say. And as far as I'm aware, this is some of the first data that anybody has ever really compiled in a pseudo-scientific manner to say whether or not a mod in sim racing is accurate. Of course, you can have your gripes with my methods, you can have your gripes with my biases, considering that I'm using lap time and or average speed as the benchmark. Is there another way that we can measure this? Is there something else that I could take into consideration in terms of the variables like the track state and like the tires? I don't know. This is what I've come up with. Feel free to opine. At any rate, though, I do thank you all very much for watching, and, of course, FerrariMan601 saying thanks, and we will see you soon.